All right, Jason. So, have you ever done these or seen these things? I don't know, they'll pop up online or whatever, but it'll be like, find out what the number one song was the week you were born, or what was the biggest movie the month you were born. Or have you ever seen those?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So that is my inspiration for how I came across the story I'm going to talk about today. I just kind of was wondering, like, what was the biggest or one of the biggest murder cases or trials or whatever from the year I was born, which of course we all know is 1999. Um,
That's a great. I need to do that. I need to come back with an episode on that too. That's a great idea.
it's a good idea, but I love that you just glazed right over the fact that I said 1999 was the year
I,
of my
I
birth.
yeah. I
Thank you.
100% glazed over it. You're
Thank you.
welcome. Remember we talked about energy. We're here for the energy.
Yeah. I look terrible for my age. 1981, which is obviously the year I was born, and so I started doing some research, and there were a couple really big things. There was something in Latin America, which I almost was going to cover that story. It was a mass murder, like 1,000 people, civilians were killed. And I sort of shied away from that because I think it was a little too. I would have flubbed a lot of the names and things like that, but I just so one of the case, and I never heard of this case. Tell me if you have. Uh, in the quiet Sierra Nevada community of Keddie, California, a gruesome unsolved quadruple homicide from 1981 continues to baffle investigators and haunt survivors to this day. The victims, 36-year-old Sue Sharp, her children, 15-year-old John and 12-year-old Tina, and John's friend Dana Wingate, 17 years old, were brutally killed in Cabin 28 of the Keddie Resort. Have you ever heard of this?
Does not ring a bell.
Yeah, I don't know how this has kind of escaped my, but it's an unsolved
Was it
case.
like a campground place?
Yeah, camping resort where they have the little cabins that you can rent, and
This is very close to Friday the 13th when that came out.
it's got that vibe.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. As we go, it might have that vibe even more. On April 11th, 1981, Sue Sharp spent the evening at home with her younger sons, Rick and Greg, 10 years old and 5 years old, respectively, along with their neighbor, Justin Smart, who was 12 years old. Her daughter, Sheila, slept at a friend's house nearby, while Tina returned to Cabin 28 after briefly visiting Sheila. So remember, again, I know there's a lot of names here. There's a lot of, you got this little cabin resort area, and there's kids and people who know each other going from place to place. But Tina being one of the victims. So she went to visit Sheila for a little while and came back to the Cabin 28. Earlier that day, Sue had driven her son John and Dana back to Keddie after they hitchhiked to nearby Quincy for a social outing. And we've talked about this. These kids are like 17, 14, and we talked about in the 70s and 80s how hitchhiking was just a thing that a lot of people cannot wrap their heads around today. These are kids, and they're like, we're going to hitchhike to this thing, this concert or get together, whatever it is. All right, let me know if you can't get a ride back, and I'll come pick you up.
Not only was it a thing, I would like the youngs talk about today. It was a vibe, right? It
Sure.
was a vibe to be able to do that. It was part of the movement, right?
Well, yeah, it just wasn't. I mean, it wasn't a thing that was looked at as, oh, hitchhiking, that's so dangerous. It just wasn't.
Right. Yeah.
Which just by today's standards is like, I would never hitchhike today.
Ever.
Yeah,
I'd get. So what do we do instead? We get in Ubers with complete strangers.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. By morning, the scene inside Cabin 28 was unimaginable. 4 victims were found. Sue was discovered lying on her side near the living room sofa, nude from the waist down, and gagged with a blue bandana and her own underwear, which had been, taped, into her mouth. She had been stabbed in the chest and her throat was stabbed horizontally, the wound passing through her larynx and nicking her spine. And on the side of her head was an imprint matching the butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB gun. John's throat was slashed, and he also had electrical cord wrapped around his neck. Dana had multiple head injuries and had been manually strangled to death. John and Dana suffered blunt force trauma to their heads caused by one or more hammers. An autopsy determined that Sue and John died from the knife wounds and blunt force trauma, and that Dana had died by asphyxiation. I mean, this, this is like absolutely a just horrific, brutal scene. I mean,
With lots of different weapons, right? You've got
knives,
knives, wire, and a hammer.
electrical cord, hammer,
Yeah.
and the BB gun, the butt of a BB
Right.
gun. Yeah. Tina Sharp was missing from all, nowhere to be found. Miraculously, and this is mind-blowing. I did a story recently where I talked about a similar situation. You'll probably recognize it. Rick, Greg, and Justin, which Justin was 12 years old. Just to go back here, Rick was 10 and Greg was 5. Okay, so you got a 5-year-old, 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old slept undisturbed in a nearby bedroom. Sheila discovered the carnage at 8 a.m. and alerted neighbors, who rescued the unharmed boys through a window, which is a move that may have actually compromised evidence. How does that happen? I mean, this scene that I've just described, the way that these poor people were murdered, and kids at that, you go, how do these kids sleep in the next bedroom, or in the bedroom, and this all happened in the living room? How does that happen without one of them waking up?
It's like there was the Jonathan Candy case that
Yes.
you did recently.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering if you remember that. And I think there were 2 children in that,
And the mother.
in that case that slept in the nearby room that were unharmed.
I don't.
So it happens.
Yeah.
Kids sleep soundly. I will say that. Look, man, my kid, who's 3.5 now, but fireworks, at the 4th of July will be, how it is in Georgia, and he'll sleep through it.
Or like thunderstorms, right?
Thunderstorms, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but it's hard to believe. 2 bloodied knives and 1 hammer were found at the scene, and blood spatter evidence from inside the house indicated that the murders had all taken place in the living room. Sheila and the Seabolt family, Sheila had gone to visit, when I said she went to the cabin to visit and came back, Sheila went to spend the night in a neighboring home. Tina had gone to visit her and come back. I had that wrong. Says that she heard no commotion. None of them heard any kind of commotion during the night. A couple living nearby in cabin number 16 was awakened at 1:15 a.m. by what sounded like muffled screaming, but nothing else.
That's actually crazy. Think about that too. When you talk about the kids not waking up and another cabin hears
Yeah.
muffled screaming, that's
Yeah.
even wilder, right?
Yeah, it is. And I don't know why, but I didn't even really put that together that that's crazy. Composite sketches were drawn of 2 suspects based on testimony from Justin, and this came out a little bit after. And Justin, again, is one of the kids, 12 years old, sleeping in the bedroom. So he didn't wake up, he didn't come out and see this murder, but he did claim to have witnessed something. He offered conflicting stories of events and stated that he had dreamed details of the murders. In a later account told under hypnosis, he claimed to have seen Sue with 2 men earlier that day or that evening. So I know that sounds like that's conflicting, but I think what I make of this is, Was he dreaming? Was he kind of semi-conscious, heard something, saw something, didn't, you know what I mean?
What's a dream and what's reality? I'm, like, in that weird sleep zone, right? Like,
Right. And especially kids, because
we've
look,
we've all had that experience before in
sure.
dreaming, like, "Did I just experience that?" Like, that dream was so real that it had to be real.
Yeah, and I think more so for kids,
Yeah.
because, if you've had my kid wake up, you've probably had yours when they were younger wake up and something, and they kinda remember something, or they're not sure if it's real or not.
Yeah.
Based on Justin's descriptions, composite sketches of two unknown men were produced by a man named Harlan Embry, who was a man who had no artistic ability and no training in forensic sketching. There was no explanation given as to why, with access to the FBI's top forensic artists, law enforcement chose to use an amateur.
Well, we just talked about that sketch artist,
We
right,
did.
out of Houston,
Yeah.
how talented they are. Now, you could argue there wasn't that many of those around the country and maybe not near this cabin, but yeah, that's a little strange.
It's weird. And it was no artistic ability. So we'll show a picture of what he did. Yeah, he didn't do too bad, I guess. The suspects were described as in their late 20s to early 30s, one standing 5'11" to 6'2", with dark blonde hair, and the other between 5'6" and 5'10", with black greasy hair. And both wore gold-framed sunglasses. And when I'm sure they weren't, but I picture Elvis's gold-framed sunglasses, I doubt that's what they were, but that's what I just keep picturing. Rumors circulated early on that the murders were ritualistic or motivated by drug trafficking, but those rumors were dismissed in the week following the murders because neither drug paraphernalia nor illegal drugs were found in the home. And you remember I told you that Tina Sharp was missing. She was 12 years old. On April 11th, 1984, so just almost 3 years to the day, a bottle collector discovered a partial human skull and part of a mandible or jawbone at Camp 18 near Feather Falls in neighboring Butte County, California, 62 miles away from the scene of the murders. The remains were confirmed by a forensic pathologist in June of 1984 to be those of Tina. So you have to wonder, I mean, does anything at all about how this murder transpired, does anything at all make sense to you at this point? Like why things were done this way? The kids were left unharmed in a bedroom, just down the hall from the living room. One young girl is taken, and 62 miles away she's found.
Yeah, I don't know what the motive is here. If you're looking for a motive, to me this feels like, I don't know. I mean, I'm throwing up like a creepy, sick guy stalking some of these kids. It's interesting that Tina's body was found at a campsite, not a random
Right,
place
right.
62 miles away, which maybe tells me that this guy's hopping around to different campsites looking to take
That's
advantage of young kids. That's what I would my uninformed opinion is that's what I think might be happening here.
that's not a bad. I mean, that's not a bad opinion, honestly, to have. It is definitely odd that there's a connection that it was another campsite. Shortly after announcing the discovery of those remains, the Butte County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous call that identified the remains as belonging to Tina, but the call was not documented in the case file. I'm sure that county knew about this quadruple homicide, but it had been 3 years and it was a different county. So a tape containing a recording of that phone call was found at the bottom of an evidence box at some point after 2013 by a deputy who was assigned to the cold case. And you think, early 80s, how much could they have done? Now you can maybe use AI to voice recognition, something,
Yeah.
call tracing. Was the call made from a cell phone? You could do ping tower data. You could do that kind of stuff. What could you really have done though in 1982, even if they would have documented it? So, there are two main suspects that have been in this case for, I don't want to say since the very beginning, but since very early on. One man, Martin Smart, who, if you remember, Justin Smart was one of the victims. Excuse me, not one of the victims. He was one of the survivors in the adjoining bedroom. This is his stepfather. In a 2016 article published by the Sacramento Bee, Martin Smart had left Keddie, California, and driven to Reno, Nevada, shortly after the murders. While there, he sent a letter to his wife, Marilyn, discussing struggles in their marriage. And in the letter, he stated, quote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." A counselor who Smart regularly visited also alleged later that he had admitted to the murders of Sue and Tina, but claimed, "I didn't have anything to do with the boys." He allegedly told the counselor that Tina was killed to prevent her from identifying him, as she had witnessed the whole thing. And the second main suspect in this case, a guy named John Bubaid, he was an ex-con with ties to Chicago organized crime, allegedly. And that's one of the theories around this, is that in some way, people talked about drugs, and they said, well, there's no paraphernalia, there's no drugs found in the home, but there's this weird alleged tie to organized crime. Don't really know much about it, but this suspect allegedly had ties to Chicago Mafia, and
I'm not buying that one.
well, let me continue. The case has actually had, I'll say this, the case has actually had, went dark for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, once you've kind of found what you can find, John Bubaid died in 1988.
Hmm.
Martin Smart died in 2000. So, even though they're suspects, it's like, short of proving something, what can you do? But the case has had updates along the way, over the years, and specifically in more recent years. In 2016, a hammer linked to Smart was dredged from a pond near the crime scene. He had, if you remember, he had reported missing, and I guess this was a thing a long time ago, that you would actually report to police things that were missing. But why would you ever report a hammer that you used in a murder?
Yeah, it's like reporting a chainsaw missing in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like, don't
Yeah.
do it.
And it didn't specifically say reported to the police, but who else would everything I saw said he reported it missing. So who else would you report it to other than the police, right? By 2018, DNA from a piece of tape at the crime scene matched a living suspect, though no charges followed. And I could not find, maybe someone out there knows this story or has seen, I could not find the name of the person that was connected to. That DNA. I couldn't find it.
They might not know.
Well, yeah, maybe, but it says to a living person, and
Ah.
so unless there's some reason they've not released that, or maybe I just wasn't looking in the right places, I didn't see the name of the person. Was it one of these two guys? You would,
Maybe because they were both deceased, they said living, but they didn't know who it was. You know what I mean?
yeah, I don't know. Um, and then in 2004, Cabin 28, where the murders took place, was demolished. So I mean, that's such a long time after the murder. If there was any evidence they were going to collect, you would hope, be collected, and you're kind of hoping at this point that just forensic advancements are gonna.
Well, it's interesting that you said that they did have the DNA, because I've just been sitting here in the background thinking, 1981 is the same year that a lot of the Atlanta child murders happened, and they have that DNA still there, as we've talked about, running it through the FBI lab, trying to get matches, but they do have those samples, and so, as you were describing, significant bloody scene, right, with a knife, with all these things happening. It's like, kept thinking to myself, I wonder if they still have, you know, um, T-shirt samples or whatever it might be, and obviously the answer is yes, so,
Yeah.
um it's not easy, but I think they could still get a match here.
Yeah, and, I mean, the case is still open. It's cold, but it's open. Again, I think every time I don't know how much evidence, forensic evidence they have, you can only test something so many times, or you only have a limited supply, and it degrades over time, but, I think that's one of those this is one of those cases that you'll read about in the paper one day, or in the paper, you'll read
On
about
the
online
interwebs.
one day. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Boy, did I just date myself. But you'll just, like, open up your news app one day, and it'll say, "DNA linked to such and such, cold case closed." I think this will be one of those cases. Maybe
Yeah.
it's, a year or 5 years from now or 10 years, but I think this is one of those that they have things and they're just piecing it together,
It
to
makes
make it
me
definitive.
it makes me think of something, which is, it kind of feels like no case will ever, and I'm being, whatever, but, like, no case is truly unsolved anymore. I
Yeah,
wonder what kind of pressure that puts on, resource pressure, whatever pressure, on these local law enforcement places where they've got cases like, this is 1981, right? They're still looking at this stuff. And a lot of that used to just be in a file. It sat there, it was never looked at. And now they're like, actually, no, we need to go back. We need to
yeah.
reinvestigate it. We need to retest. We need to do all those things. How do they actually manage a lot of this stuff, especially the smaller kind of local police force, right? Like, it's a good thing that it's happening. I just wonder, in their day to day, how much of this is focusing on like stuff that was so old, right?
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that you just like in Georgia, for example, I mean, the local sheriff or local police department can handle a case, or they can call in the GBI, right?
Yeah,
So if it's another
true.
case where the FBI, if it's a case that the FBI could assist with across state lines or something like that, then you have the ability to say, "Hey, we have this case." I guess I don't know, how involved the FBI gets with cold cases, but or California's, GBI, whatever that is, the CBI. I don't know what it's called. Um, but then again, that's gonna they have a case file coming. If it's the FBI, they have cases, cold cases like this from all over the country. So is it going to get looked at? Are you better keeping it in your office and
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, you got some extra time, you know, um, Deputy Joe, take a look at
Yeah.
this
Well,
case."
I'm expecting, could be 6 months from now, could be 6 years from now, a text from you or a call where you say, "I called it." Like, "Yep, it happened."
Yeah,
I think that's true here.
yeah.
I
I
hope it's true.
I think this one will be solved conclusively. I think they'll close this case. My prediction, like I said, I mean, who knows when, but I just think the fact that they have DNA, they've already pulled DNA, and it's been linked to someone that and by the way, the investigators have said that they feel there are people alive still connected to that are
Mm.
still alive
Mhm.
connected to this case. And maybe that's why that name hasn't been put out there, because they don't want to say we know who you are.
Mm.
Um,
True.
so that's it. That's the Keddie, California murders. Horrible, horrible. You know, anytime there's kids involved, I always say that. I probably have 50 examples of me saying that, but it's just, whether there were mob ties, or whether it was, silencing a witness, or whatever it was, and there's just kids that are innocent bystanders. It's a horrible. So, we'll see you next time. Thanks for checking out the show. Hit all the socials at How It All Went South. YouTube if you're not watching there. And am I missing anything?
Nope.
Cool. See you all next time.
Alright, see ya.